In this episode of Trekking Through Compliance, we take up the episode Obsession.
Compliance, the final frontier. Tom Fox is the voyager of Trekking Through Compliance. His mission? To explore the original series and seek out and share what it can teach you about compliance. Here's your host, Tom Fox.
Trekking Through Compliance, Episode 42, Obsession. In this episode of Trekking Through Compliance, we consider the episode Obsession, which aired on December 15th, 1967, and occurred on Stardate 3619.2. Story synopsis. After beaming down to a planet to examine titanium deposits, Kirk notices a sweet honey-like odor. He recognizes it as something he encountered 11 years ago and orders the security guards to scan for chromium and fire at the gaseous cloud they may encounter. 2 security guards are killed by the gaseous creature after it removes the red corpuscles and feeds on their hemoglobin. Kirk, Spock, and Ensign Rizzo survive, but Rizzo has much of his hemoglobin removed and must be beamed back to the Enterprise for treatment. Kirk becomes obsessed with the destruction of the creature, which has killed half of the crew of the U.S.S. Farragut, which was Kirk's first deep space assignment. Kirk appears willing to miss his rendezvous with the U.S.S. Orktown, the ship he is supposed to meet with, in order to pick up perishable vaccines and then deliver them to the planet Theta 7. After Rizzo dies, Kirk beams back down with a landing party, which includes Ensign Garavik, who was the son of Kirk's commander on the Farragut. Garavik fires Phaser 2 when he spots the gas cloud, but not before the 2 other officers with him have been attacked. Kirk grills Garavik, accusing him of freezing up and being responsible for the death of one officer and the severe injury of another, then relieves him of duty. Reading the log file of the Farragut incident, Spock learns that Kirk's obsession is fueled by the fact that he was the one who froze 11 years previously, and he has blamed himself for the deaths of half of the ship's crew ever since. When Chekhov detects the creature leaving the planet's surface, heading into space, Kirk pursues it. Scanners report the creature is in a border state between matter and energy. The creature slows and then heads for the Enterprise. Neither phasers nor photon torpedoes damage it, and it enters the Enterprise through the number 2 impulse vent, which has been inadvertently left open by Scott after performing routine maintenance. Spock realizes that this is the reason for the creature's immunity to weapons fire, because it is able to move itself in order to avoid the phasers. On board the Enterprise, the creature attacks 2 crewmen and enters the ventilation system. Spock goes on to explain the creature's ability to avoid being hit by phasers to Garavik, but is then attacked when the creature comes through Garavik's room ventilation shaft. Spock is saved only because his hemoglobin is not based on iron but on copper. The creature then leaves the ship and heads away at warp speed, but Kirk has a hunch of where the creature is headed. In some mystical way, Kirk has sensed the home of the creature is Planet 4 of the Tycho system, located where the Farragut was attacked. Spock is in favor of the chase since sensor readings indicate the creature is about to fission into multiple spawned babies. Kirk and Garavik beam down to the planet and set hemoplasma as a bait, but the creature takes the bait before the explosive charge of antimatter is ready. Kirk proposes to use himself as bait and orders Garavik back to the ship. Garavik attempts to knock Kirk out and act as bait himself, but Kirk overpowers him. The 2 are then beamed up in the nick of time, and the charge of antimatter is set off. After some difficulties with the transporter, Garavik and Kirk arrive back on board the Enterprise safe and sound. So the fun fact today is actually a personal fun fact. This episode has my all-time favorite Star Trek line. After the creature attempts to attack Spock and is actually repulsed, Dr. McCoy says to Spock, "That green blood of his left a bad taste in the creature's mouth." Spock replies, colloquially expressed, but essentially correct. I've used that quote for 50 years. It's one of my favorite quotes of all time. In this episode, I want to talk about the remastered Star Trek, the original series DVDs, which of course are also now available to stream online. Obsession was the 65th episode of the remastered version of the original series to air, premiering in syndication on April 2008. Aside from the standard CGI replacement footage of the Enterprise, this episode most notably featured new effects shot of the planets Argus X and Tycho 4, as well as revised footage of the choronium cloud creature and the Enterprise's phaser fire into it while it was in space. One piece of the new footage added was a shot of the crater left of the antimatter blast on Tycho 4, shown at the end of the episode. This replaced the stock footage of the Enterprise traveling through space. This episode is the only one out of the entire series on Netflix that does not use the remastered version, but it does have it on Paramount Plus if you have that series. If you've never checked out the remastered versions, you should do so. I, of course, have all of them on DVD, being the fanatic that I am, but they're also on Paramount Plus going forward. So check out the remastered versions of Star Trek, the original series, for some great updates in the visual effects. So what are the compliance takeaways from this episode? Well, first, in part of the episode, Dr. McCoy becomes very concerned with the obsession of Kirk to kill this creature. And he conducts a very informal hearing as to Kirk's mental state for an entry into his medical log on whether Kirk is fit to continue. McCoy asks some very direct questions. And as a CCO, sometimes you have to speak truth to power. There hopefully are not going to be many times where you have to be Dr. No from the land of no. But if someone is going to engage in conduct which puts them at risk or the company at risk for criminal prosecution or civil liability, you have to put your foot down and you have to say no. This is always a difficult discussion for many chief compliance officers, particularly when your only other real option is resignation, although I suppose you could become a whistleblower to the Securities and Exchange Commission. That has now been recognized as an acceptable principle. So sometimes you have to take a stand, and sometimes you have to say very firmly, speak truth to power. Number two, what's the root cause analysis of a problem? Here, Spock does some, I would say, preliminary investigation, but he finally, through a root cause analysis, basically in his head, comes to the understanding of how the creature is able to avoid both phaser fire and photon torpedoes. The creature is a permeable gaseous state, but it's also energy. So it can allow these energy forms, and that's what these weapons are, advanced energy forms, to pass through it. And finally, you've got to train for crisis management. The Ensign Garavik froze just briefly when he first saw the creature, and you have to be trained and ready to aggressively pursue an enemy, particularly one like this who can move incredibly fast. So crisis training, do it before the crisis arrives, so when it does arrive, you won't be scrambling to try and train for it. Join us tomorrow when we take up the episode Wolf in the Fold.
If you enjoyed this episode of Trekking Through Compliance, you can help it grow by sharing it with the biggest Trek fan you know.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.